Welcome to the Rational Living Show. I'm your host, Dr. Aldo Pucci. This is a weekly show that is broadcast every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern United States time. Welcome, everyone. So thankful that you're able to join us. I'm president of the National Association of Cognitive Behavioral Therapists, an association that's based in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. I developed an approach to cognitive behavioral therapy that I call rational living therapy. I have taught therapists, thousands, hundreds of thousands, actually, of therapists throughout the United States and abroad in the rational living therapy approach. Rational living therapy focuses on the fact that our thoughts cause our feelings and behaviors, not people and things and situations and events. I'm also author of 2 books, The Client's Guide to Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, which is now in its 2nd edition, and Feel the Way You Want to Feel No Matter What. You can find both of those on Amazon.com. This is an interactive show. If you're listening on Podbean, you may use the Podbean app to call in with your questions. And if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, X, or LinkedIn, you may type in your questions, and I will do my best to answer them. The title of this week's episode is Real Talk on Depression, Your Top Questions Answered. And so I'm answering questions this evening. And so certainly if you have, I'm going to answer some questions that have been submitted throughout the country. But certainly if you have questions, be sure to type them in if you're watching the video version of our podcast or call in through Podbean. So I have a list of questions here that have been submitted throughout the country. And so let's get to them. Here's a question from Grand Rapids, Michigan. I've been to Grand Rapids many times conducting trainings there. And so the question is this: Dr. Pucci, how do I know if what I'm feeling is actual depression or if I'm just going through a difficult season in life? Okay. This is a common question, actually. And so one of the things that's important for people to free themselves of, and I teach this to therapists, is this whole idea of clinical depression. You might have heard of that term. This person is clinically depressed, but it's a made-up term. And depression is not something that you have. In rational living therapy, we're not concerned with whether you meet some made-up criteria for depression. So we're unconcerned with some kind of diagnostic label, and if you feel bad enough to meet that label. What we want to know is, are you feeling the way you want to feel? So it doesn't matter to me how depressed you've been feeling, a little bit or a lot. What matters to me is, do you want to change how you're feeling? Are you satisfied with how you're feeling, or do you want to change that? Okay. However, your question, I believe, is the result and been strongly influenced by many in the medical field who insist that people take antidepressant so-called medication. So the question really is asking, do I need medication or not? Or do I need treatment or not? The difference between depression and sadness is the difference between thinking you need something as opposed to only wanting something. See, that's the difference. So we're not concerned with diagnostic labels. We're not concerned with whether you meet the criteria of major depression or any of that nonsense. All I'm concerned about is if a person comes to me and says, Dr. Pucci, I've been feeling depressed, the very first thing I want to know is, what have you been feeling depressed about? Is the person reacting to something? And then us working on that issue, helping them to learn how to counsel themselves rationally and to feel the way they want to feel. Okay. And by the way, if you are a therapist and you would like training in the rational living therapy approach, I encourage you to visit cbtonlinetraining.com. That's cbtonlinetraining.com. The second question that we have is from Lubbock, Texas. Let me check to make sure we have. Okay, great. Is from Lubbock, Texas. And the person asked this question: is depression always caused by something that happened in life, or can it just appear for no reason? Okay. Now, the first thing to understand is depression is never caused by something that happened in a person's life. Okay. Depression is never caused by things. Depression is a reaction to something perhaps that happened, but is not the cause. What happened is not the cause of feeling depressed. Depression is caused by depressing thoughts about things. Okay. Secondly, there's always a reason for feeling down. If a person feels down and lethargic, but they're not reacting to something, they're not thinking depressing thoughts about something, that down feeling might be caused by a sluggish thyroid, for example, or a problem with a person's adrenal glands, or anemia, perhaps. Okay. So there's always a reason for feeling whatever it is that you're feeling. The question is if you're feeling down, is it depression? Meaning you're aware of something, you think depressing thoughts about it, and then those depressing thoughts cause your depressive feelings? Or is it the result of a physiological problem such as anemia, for example? Okay. All right. So, so it's never caused by things, but it's usually a reaction to things. Okay. This next question is from a person in Erie, Pennsylvania. And this person asks, why does depression make everything feel pointless, even things I used to enjoy? Okay. Now, again, there is not this thing that dwells within a person or dwells within you called depression that makes things seem pointless, right? You hear people talk this way. You see this on television ads. This treats your depression as if you have this thing that dwells in you called depression that makes you feel depressed. No, depressed is how you feel when you think depressing thoughts. And the fact is, everyone with a healthy, normal brain, if they think depressing thoughts, they are going to feel depressed. Okay? That as long as their brain and body are working properly, that's the way it works. So people depress themselves about things that are important to them. Often they think that their happiness hinges on that thing. So if they lose it, they often think that other things are pointless because they could not possibly get any joy out of them. How can they if it's impossible to be happy as long as this thing as long as this thing is not present in your life? For example, a man's wife leaves him. He thinks that his happiness depended on her being in his life. Now that she's gone, he thinks that it's not possible for him to feel happy again. So trying to enjoy things is just pointless in his mind. Okay. Also, it could be that some of what he did, perhaps the job that he had, how hard he worked, etc., might have been for her in his mind. And now that she's gone, he might wonder, well, what's the point of me working this job or working this hard? I don't want it. I don't need it. I was doing it for her. So the fact is this: the human brain does not have conditions on happiness. The human brain does not say, I can only be happy if my wife is in my life, or if I have this particular job, or if I live in this particular house, or if I can engage in this particular hobby, or if I have the ability to walk, or any of those things. The human brain doesn't say that. We learn that nonsense. Okay. What is required for happiness is a brain and a body that are working well enough the way they're supposed to be, and happiness producing thoughts. That is it. But the human brain does not care what we make ourselves happy about, miserable about, or calm about. It couldn't care less. We only think that it does. Okay. So therefore, there is just no requirement, of things being present in your life. So that's why sometimes things seem pointless, because a person figures, well, what's the point if I don't have this in my life? And it's just it's not rational. Okay, the next question. Let me see over here if we have. Okay, and remember, you can call in with your questions with the Podbean app, or type in your questions. The next one is from Denver, Colorado. I've been there quite a few times conducting trainings as well. Um, and this question says, when you're depressed, how can you challenge negative thoughts when they feel so true? Okay. Well, the first thing to realize is that there is no such thing as feeling true. Your thoughts do not feel true. Okay. What you feel is the result of believing that your thoughts are true, are correct. So, in other words, you might think depressing thoughts that you sincerely believe. You feel depressed as a result. And then you come to the conclusion that those thoughts must be true. Otherwise, you would not feel depressed. However, your feelings only prove that you are thinking something to correct them. Your feelings do not prove that what you are thinking is correct. Okay. So just because a person thinks depressing thoughts does not mean that those thoughts are correct. And just because you feel depressed as the result of those depressing thoughts does not prove in any way that those thoughts are correct. The only thing it proves is that you sincerely believe those depressing thoughts. And therefore, your brain says, okay, well, it's time to make the body feel depressed. So, to overcome that, that's the first thing to realize, is that my emotions do not prove anything. The fact that I'm thinking these thoughts do not prove, and feeling the result does not prove that my thinking is correct. It only proves that I think they are correct. Another thing to do to combat that thinking is to ask yourself, do I hope that my thinking is incorrect? Do I hope that I'm wrong about this thinking, this depressing thinking? Maybe a person thinks, well, I'll never feel happy again because, my loved one left me, so I'll never feel happy again. And they sincerely believe that. And so they really depress themselves because they think it would be a horrible thing to never feel happy again. So ask yourself, I know I'm convinced that I'm right in thinking this way, but do I wish that I were wrong? Would it be a wonderful thing to discover that I was wrong about this? But not just the facts about this, but the underlying assumptions as well, like that I can't stand it, I can't take it, I need it not be this way. Do I hope, would it be a wonderful thing to discover that I was wrong about that? Okay. All right. So that's how you can work at challenging that. So just because I feel depressed does not mean that my depressive thinking is correct. Okay. All right. Great. And again, if you have any questions, be sure to ask them concerning depression. You can type them in, if you're watching on YouTube, for example, or you can use the Podbean app. Actually, you can type them in there as well, or call in as well. Okay. All right. The next question is from Hollywood, Florida. I used to conduct many trainings in that area in Fort Lauderdale for a couple of different mental health centers there. Really enjoyed time there. The next question from Hollywood is, how can I motivate myself to do anything when I feel exhausted and have no energy, from feeling depressed? Well, the first thing to realize is doing things is very important in terms of getting better because it helps you to prove to yourself that you can stand your personally undesirable situation. So, in other words, if a person has something happen that's personally undesirable to them, and they really dislike it, and perhaps they think they can't stand that life is this way now, they can't take it, they need it not be. The more they lie around and do nothing, the more they're acting as though it's that what they're thinking is correct. They're acting out the part. Okay. And so, therefore, and not to mention the fact that the more that they lie around, the easier it is for them to continue thinking that way, that my situation is hopeless, that there's no way I'll ever feel happy again, because they do not give themselves the opportunity to see that they can be happy doing something else. They can find happiness in other things. Okay. So when people act as though that something is the end of the world, then they think that confirms their thinking, or they wouldn't be acting that way. The other thing to consider is that lying around, not doing much of anything, tends to produce lethargy, and then that tends to be labeled depression sometimes. So it's very important, no matter how much, there is no such thing as being too depressed to eat. There is no such thing as being too depressed to read, or too depressed to walk, or too depressed to bathe yourself, too depressed to get dressed, or any of those things. Okay. So feeling depressed does not make you unable to do those things. You might not feel like doing those things, but it doesn't make you unable to do those things. So it's very important to make yourself eat, even though you might not feel like it, because you need your nutrients. You need your food for energy. And then start off small. Add a little bit each day. If you've spent the past week on the couch, um, get up and walk around the house. Just walk around the house. The next day, perhaps take a shower if you haven't been showering. The day after that, walk around the house, take a shower, and then just step outside. Look around. The next day, get off the couch, take a shower, step out of your house, and go for a 5-minute walk. So build on this. Work at building your endurance a little bit at a time. Refuse to take an all or none approach, and because that's what people often do. Well, if I can't get off the couch and go to work, then I'm not getting off the couch at all. And there's just no point in that. Sometimes it's important for people to work their way to that. And so start off small and gradually increase what you're doing. Now, what you might find is that you have an exponential effect here. That you thought, so you get off the couch, you take a shower, and next thing you know, you're going for a 5-minute walk because you feel like it now. And then the next day, you might go for a 15-minute walk when you thought you were only going to do a 10-minute walk. But start off slow and build gradually. Also, have important reasons for yourself to do these things, to get moving. Perhaps it might be your spouse who's counting on you, or your kids, or bills that need to be paid, or a variety of things. One of the biggest lies is that, oh, I don't care about things any longer. Things don't matter to me, which is nonsense. Um, you might not feel like caring, but you still do. It's just covered up with feeling depressed and obsessing about whatever it is that you've been depressing yourself about. So get yourself moving, and you'll see that that will help you. Okay. Someone says, many thanks, Dr. Pucci. This depression talk is really interesting. By the way, podcast on I Want to Die, I've shared to my therapist. He converted it to my own I want to be homeless at a massive breakthrough. Well, thank God for that. That's fantastic. So glad. I'm so thankful for that. That's great. Someone asked, how does a person tell the difference between wanting to change a personally undesirable situation due to feeling sad and unhappy about it versus sticking with the situation in acceptance? Well, um, that's a great question. One of the things that we teach in rational living therapy is that just because a person decides to more rationally, calmly accept a personally undesirable situation does not mean that they want it to remain that way. Okay. So just because you learn how to refuse to make yourself miserable over the way it is does not mean that you want to keep it that way. But what it does mean is that by refusing to make yourself miserable about it, you are more likely to have placed yourself in a much better position to make use of your intelligence, your knowledge, your energy, your resources to do something about it, to change it if it can be changed. Okay, so so what we recommend is if you would really rather your situation be different. Um, Work at accepting the possibility that you might not find a way to make it different. Work at more calmly accepting that, that I only want it to be different. I in no way need it to be, like my life depends on it. If it's not different, if there's nothing I can do about it, then I can find happiness, contentment with other things, not because I have to be happy or content, but because I want to be. And then once you have that straight, continue to look, continue to do your research to see, might there be a way to change this? Okay, could there be? And see, I want to make sure that. So, how does a person tell the difference between wanting to change a personal undesirable situation uh, versus sticking with it? Yeah, so you can certainly do both. You can want to change it and accept the possibility that you may never find a way to change it. Okay. All right. Great. Oh, okay. Someone said that, so the person followed up. I'm talking about a job change. That's great. The job won't change. I would have to change jobs at great costs. Okay, well then, in with that kind of situation, a person might come to the conclusion that that they the rational thing for them to do is to remain where they are and rationally deal with whatever personally unpleasant aspects of that job remain. See what they can do about those personally undesirable aspects. But they might decide that they are better off in terms of their goals, rationally tolerating those situations, those undesirable things, because perhaps, let's say, financially, they would be better off in the long run. They might be able to financially enjoy their retirement more, as opposed to, I can't take the way things are now, and I know that I'm going to suffer financially if I leave, but I just have to because it's unbearable. That's really the difference. So you might find that whatever aspects of the job you dislike, are putting up with them um, are worth it compared to the great cost that you would incur by changing jobs. Okay. All right. The next question, great question. The next question is from Phoenix, Arizona. been there many times as well, conducting trainings. Um, and this question is, can people fully recover from depression? Can people fully recover from depression, or is it something you have to live with forever? Okay. Again, depression is not something that you have to recover from. Okay. Depression is something that you do. Depression is the result of learned thinking. Anything you learn, you can unlearn and learn a different way instead. So, is a person capable of returning to old irrational thinking? Certainly they are. However, the more evidence a person has that the old irrational way of thinking is indeed irrational, is incorrect, and the new way of thinking is correct, the less likely it is that they will revert back to that old way of thinking. Okay. So the more convinced a person is that that the old way of thinking is irrational because the evidence just proves it, and the more evidence they have that the new way of thinking is rational, the less likely it is a person would return to their old irrational, depressing thoughts about whatever it is that they were depressing themselves about. Also, consider this. Sometimes there are new reasons for old behavior. Okay, sometimes there are new reasons for old behavior. So when people accurately view feeling depressed as having three parts, there's what you're aware of, there's what you think about what you're aware of, the depressing thoughts about what you're aware of, and then there is the emotional feelings that are the result of that depressing thoughts. The more they realize that, the more they realize that if they undepress themselves about one thing, that doesn't mean that they have necessarily undepressed themselves about other things. So sometimes, so what happens, and I hear this often from therapists. Well, I thought the person was over their depression problem, but a few months later, they were right back to feeling depressed again, as if it came back. Well, the fact is there is no it. Okay, there is not this thing called depression that came back. So what I want to know, if this happened to someone that I was working with, a client, what I would want to know is, have they returned to depressing themselves about what we thought we had resolved before, the what they had depressed themselves before, or are they depressing themselves about something new that they aren't quite sure how to, or haven't been quite sure how to apply the rational self counseling to that new issue? And if we've ended therapy correctly, it's much more likely that if they return to therapy, it's because they've depressed themselves about something new that they didn't quite know how to apply the rational self counseling skills to. Okay. But so there's a huge problem with just viewing oneself as feeling depressed without concerning oneself over what you're feeling depressed about. And so that's why people often think it came back. It would be like thinking you have a perpetual sinus infection, when you might resolve your sinus infection, and then a couple of years later you have a new reason for a sinus infection. They are two different infections, they're not the same infection. Okay. All right, great. Excuse me. All right. Okay, good. So the next question is from Chicago, Illinois, another great place. We had our national conference there one year. A person asks, sometimes I feel guilty for being depressed because other people have it worse. Is that normal? Certainly, that is normal. You need not guilt yourself about it. but it is normal in the usual or common sense. This is a common thing that people do, but you don't have to do it. Now, something to consider is that you have a right to depress yourself as much as you care to. No one's going to arrest you for depressing yourself. Also, there is no requirement that you have it worse than others or as bad as others for you to be permitted to depress yourself. There's no requirement. This isn't a competition. Okay. However, sometimes people guilt themselves because they realize that they're being ungrateful. They realize that no matter how bad their situation is, it could always be worse. And sometimes a person might depress themselves and look at someone else and say, well, I think I've come across someone who has it worse. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have a right to depress yourself. However, it is important to put things into perspective. That so if I am thinking that something is the end of the world and treating it as if it were the end of the world, when in fact it's obviously not, how would I react if in fact it were the end of the world? You see? And so certainly sometimes comparing our situation to others in that sense can be helpful in the sense of helping us to have some gratitude. Well, at least it's not as bad as that. I hope that the other people do better as well. I hope that they resolve whatever it is that's going on. I'm thankful that at least my situation isn't as bad as as it could be. Okay. Gratitude certainly helps to prevent depression and especially anger. Anger, as we'll talk about in future podcasts, is based on an entitlement mentality. I'm entitled to this and I'm entitled to that. But when you are focused on gratitude, what helps you to be focused on gratitude is to realize you're not entitled to anything. It's as I often say, it's only by the grace of God that you have your next heartbeat. So going around thinking I'm entitled to this, it's not fair that I don't have this. And sometimes that's how people depress themselves as well, because they think they were cheated out of something. I was cheated out of more time with my spouse or what have you, rather than being thankful for the time that you did have with them. Okay, so you need not compare yourself to see if you have a right to depress yourself. You just do. The question is that how you're wanting to feel? Is it rational for you to depress yourself? Is the depressive thinking that's causing you to feel depressed, rational? That's what you want to examine. Um, and so I encourage you to consider that. Okay. All right. Let's see if we have any other questions here. Yeah, someone said comparison is the thief of joy. It sure is. That's right. Let's just be grateful for what we do have, rather than comparing ourselves to others. Right. Um, uh, and thinking that we have a guarantee on what we have, and somehow we've been cheated. Okay. Great. All right. Let's see if we have any other questions. Um, that doesn't look. Okay, so it's wonderful. So we've finished up our podcast series on depression, and we'll start a new topic next week. This is the Rational Living Show with your host, yours truly, Dr. Aldo Pucci, broadcast every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern United States time. Make sure to share the podcast with your friends and family, and if you're a therapist, with your clients. And as we saw tonight, if you're a client with your therapist, that's wonderful. And it can be a blessing to those who listen to it. Also, please be sure to visit our website, nacbt.org. That's nacbt.org, the website for the National Association of Cognitive Behavioral Therapists. Also, if you're interested in training in rational living therapy, please visit cbtonlinetraining.com. That's cbtonlinetraining.com. All right. Well, thank you all for your support, and I look forward to seeing you all again. And everyone, please take care.